Ah, the Titanic. You hear the name and you immediately have a picture in your mind, right? For more than 100 years, its story has been the one we all know. It's the ultimate cautionary tale. But here's the thing. The Titanic wasn't a solo act. It was actually one of three sister ships, a trio of titans. And believe me, the stories of the other two are just as dramatic and in some ways even more unbelievable. Okay, let's get into it.
So yeah, this is really what we're here to talk about. We all know the story of the iceberg, the sinking, the movie. We've got that down. But what about the Olympic and the Britannic? Turns out their stories are absolutely wild, and you really can't understand the whole epic, tragic saga without knowing what happened to them too.
You've got to picture the scene. It's the early 1900s, and the competition for the North Atlantic shipping routes is just fierce. I mean, it's an all-out war between companies to have the biggest, the best, the most luxurious ocean liner on the planet. And the White Star Line? Well, they had a grand plan to pretty much end the competition for good.
So White Star Line's game plan was a little different. See, they weren't trying to build the fastest ship. That prize, called the Blue Ribbon, belonged to their rival Cunard's ship, the Mauretania. Instead, White Star decided to go all in on size and pure, over-the-top luxury. We're talking floating palaces. This whole thing was a massive, massive financial gamble, backed by the one and only J.P. Morgan. And for a gamble that big to pay off, they really needed everything to go perfectly. Spoiler alert, it didn't.
And you know, the string of bad luck for these ships didn't even start with the Titanic. Nope, it started with the very first ship of the class, the one they were all named after, the RMS Olympic. Her career started with a bang, and I do not mean that in a good way.
So, the Olympic's first voyage to New York was a smashing success. I mean, tens of thousands of people turned out just to see the biggest moving object ever built by man. Everything was going great. But then, just 3 months later, on her fifth voyage, she had a run-in with a British Royal Navy warship, the HMS Hawke. Now, the Hawke had a bow designed for ramming other ships, and it tore a huge, gaping hole in the Olympic's side. 2 of her watertight compartments flooded. But here's the thing. She didn't sink. She limped back to port. And what's really ironic is that this accident actually made people more confident in the ship's design. It kind of cemented this idea that these Olympic-class liners were, practically unsinkable.
So the ship survived, but it came at a crazy high cost. And to make things so much worse, a court ruled that the Olympic was to blame for the collision. So the White Star Line was stuck with the repair bill for both ships. That cost completely wiped out their projected profits for the first 2 years. It was a financial nightmare, and it even delayed the final outfitting of her sister ship, the Titanic.
And get this, in a twist that is just absolutely chilling to look back on, the captain of the Olympic during that crash was a man named Edward Smith. White Star Line's internal investigation cleared him completely. In fact, as a sign of their complete faith in him, they gave him command of their brand new flagship vessel, the RMS Titanic, for her maiden voyage. Of course, that would be his final command.
So with one ship badly damaged and another lying at the bottom of the Atlantic, the story takes another huge turn. We've got a second sinking on the horizon, but also the surprising transformation of that unlucky first sister into an uncelebrated war hero.
It is just wild when you compare the fates of the two ships that sank. 4 years after the Titanic, the youngest sister, the Britannic, also went down. But just look at these numbers. The Britannic, which had been turned into a hospital ship for World War I, hit a German sea mine. It sank in just 55 minutes. That's 3 times faster than the Titanic. But almost everybody survived. Why? Well, lessons had been learned. After the Titanic, there were mandatory lifeboat drills, more lifeboats, and in this case, the water was warmer and help was nearby. It made all the difference.
Meanwhile, while her 2 younger sisters met these horrible ends, the original ship, the Olympic, found a whole new lease on life during the war. She was painted in dazzle camouflage, fitted with guns, and turned into a troop ship. This was the beginning of her redemption story.
And her service record was just incredible. She rescued shipwrecked sailors, she safely transported more than 200,000 troops across the submarine-infested Atlantic, and then, and this is my favorite part, in 1918, her crew spotted a German U-boat on the surface. Instead of trying to flee, the captain ordered full speed ahead, and this massive ocean liner rammed and sank the submarine. The once unlucky ship was now known as Old Reliable.
Okay, and just when you think this story can't get any crazier, let me tell you about Violet Jessup. She was a stewardess and nurse. She was on board the Olympic when it hit the Hawke. She was on the Titanic when it sank. And yep, you guessed it, she was on the Britannic when it sank. And she survived all 3. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. It's an absolutely unbelievable story of being in the worst place at the worst time over and over again.
So, after the war, the Olympic was the last one standing. She went back to being a passenger liner, and for a little while, it really seemed like her days of bad luck were finally over.
Yeah, during the Roaring '20s, Old Reliable became one of the most popular ships crossing the Atlantic. She was a favorite of the rich and famous. We're talking movie stars like Charlie Chaplin, royalty, you name it. She was finally living up to that original promise of being a floating palace. But the financial damage from losing her two sisters had never really gone away for the White Star Line. And then the Great Depression hit. The good times for the Olympic, and for her owners, were numbered.
Her final years were pretty bleak. The struggling White Star Line was forced to merge with their old rival, Cunard. Then in 1934, sailing through heavy fog, the Olympic slammed into the Nantucket lightship, a smaller vessel that served as a floating lighthouse, and sank it, killing 7 of its 11 crewmen. That was really the final nail in the coffin. A year later, she was retired, and by 1937, the last of the 3 sisters was sold for scrap.
So when you look back at it all, what's the legacy of these 3 incredible ships? Well, one became a legend, another is a tragic footnote, and the third, well, the third is almost completely forgotten.
This chart just says it all, doesn't it? White Star Line builds 3 of the largest objects on Earth. 2 of them combined saw less than a year of service. Only the Olympic, the unlucky one, actually managed to have a full, long career, 26 years.
But, you know, the legacy of these ships pops up in the strangest places. In Halifax, Nova Scotia, there's a cemetery where 150 victims of the Titanic are buried, and one particular gravestone gets more flowers and visitors than all the others combined. The name on it is simply J. Dawson.
Now that name, J. Dawson, sounds pretty familiar, right? Especially if you've seen the 1997 James Cameron movie. So it begs the question, could the character played by Leonardo DiCaprio have actually been a real person? Well, the answer is no. The grave belongs to a man named Joseph Dawson. He worked in the engine room, shoveling coal. The director, James Cameron, has said he had no idea there was a real J. Dawson on the ship when he wrote the script. But after that movie became a worldwide sensation, this purely coincidental gravestone became a kind of pilgrimage site for fans of the film.
So at the end of the day, you're left with this big question. Was this trio of sister ships truly cursed? Was there some kind of supernatural bad luck that followed them from the shipyard? Or were there dramatic stories of collisions, icebergs, and sea mines, just the harsh, brutal reality of what happens when you push technology to its absolute limits in a very, very dangerous time? That's a good one to chew on.